lost, Batman.
As a patient.
Do guests get to keep these?
Sure, you do whatever you want with it. We got a closet full of them.
Yeah, well, I had some really interesting nightmares.
But it was your place to put her in danger.
It wasn't like that. I volunteered.
You think you did. You don't know him like I do. He manipulates. I changed. The game's over, Batman. I quit.
Robin, wait.
Batman Endgame is not a time heist. No. It is a 6-issue miniseries where the Joker releases an airborne virus so that every citizen in Gotham turns into these mini Joker maniacs, running around, flipping cars, lighting shit on fire. But no tiki torches though. No tiki torches. I mean, they're not that bad, right? Yeah, you white people. Classic evil riot stuff, you know? Now that already sounds bad enough to make the list, but it gets worse. So the Joker also uses this virus to make the Justice League members try and kill Batman. Yeah, making your friends turn against you. That's the worst. So Batman had to use everything he has to fight off his powerful co-workers. And what I love about the Joker / what terrifies me the most about the Joker is how he uses Batman's true identity against him. It's amazing that no matter how many times he does something like this, the stakes are always so high, and it makes you not want to stop reading. And it's resolved with both Batman and Joker having their memories wiped, but those images of Gotham citizens with those horrid smiles drawn across their face, that lives in your head rent-free. Okay, I gotta include this one. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix scooped an Oscar for his performance in the 2019 Joker movie, written and directed by comedic all-star Todd Phillips. So we have to talk about some of the crazy key scenes, specifically the way he kills Randall. Spoilers. So we have Arthur Fleck in his apartment. He's getting warm, he's getting his face ready before his big TV gig on the Franklin Murray Show later that night. And then he's joined by his former colleagues, Randall and Gary. So they question his face paint, obviously, by asking if he got a new job or maybe he's planning to go to the rally. And Arthur says, no, his mom died, so he's celebrating. I mean, that's one way of mourning, okay. So Randall asks a few questions about these recent crimes, so Arthur keeps the conversation going a little bit, stalling as he pulls out a knife. And then out of nowhere, he stabs and kills Randall. And the fact that Gary was there like the whole time made us believe nothing bad is gonna happen because Arthur likes Gary. Who doesn't like Gary? He's terrified of what he just saw. He asks Arthur immediately why he just did that. Do you watch the Murray Franklin Show? He responds, yeah, I'm gonna be on it tonight. This scene is just so chilling because he assures Gary so well that he can go free. He even pretends to like lunge at him as he walks by as like a joke. That's how comfortable he is around him. Dude's nuts. Number 7, torturing Tim Drake. I'll begin with how I peeled back the layers of the boy's mind. Joker says in the Batman Beyond Return of the Joker animated film created by Tim and Paul Dini. We see the Joker and Harley kidnap Robin. How did this happen? Well, Tim Drake was out one night patrolling the streets by himself, just getting it done, and then all of a sudden he has to save a lady from 2 thugs. No problem, 2 thugs? Easy. Turns out this was all a setup, classic Joker, and it worked. The Joker trapped him and took him to Arkham Asylum where he used shock therapy and serums, anything to break him down. He straight up tortured him for like weeks at a time. He was brainwashed until he eventually gave up all these secrets about Batman. And they end up turning him into a mini Joker, giving him the appropriate name of Joker Jr., little JJ.
Lost, Batman.
Number 6. His wife Iris West was killed by Zoom. Since the first appearance of Barry Allen in 1956, he's been paired up with Iris West, another DC power couple like Lois and Clark. They've been married and had all kinds of relationship drama. While she's attending a costume party dressed as Batgirl, Zoom waits for her in the kitchen, and when she comes to get a drink, he kills her. Using his speed powers to vibrate his hand at turbo speed, he passes his hand through her skull and does fatal damage to the molecules inside her brain. This causes instantaneous death, and the tragedy of it all is devastating for Barry. Later in the story, his true love is brought back to him through some time travel stuff and reincarnation, but it's still a seriously heart-wrenching moment for the Flash. Number 5. He killed a man. After the death of his first wife, Barry eventually met and fell in love with Fiona Webb. and the two dated on and off. She worked for a senator named Creed Phillips on his election campaign. When Creed is revealed to secretly be the villain Eradicator and later dies, Fiona and Barry realize through the whole ordeal that they really do love each other and decide that they're going to get married. On the day of the wedding, the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, shows up again and attacks Barry. The two race across the city fighting each other, but when Zoom switches his focus to Barry's fiance, Flash goes into a rage and he runs up and grabs him by the neck from behind. Unfortunately, the sheer force of this alone snaps the villain's neck and kills him, and Barry is racked with guilt over having killed someone. The city even has him stand trial, and his longtime friend Wally testifies against him, saying Flash should have done more to stop Zoom without killing him. It's a real low point for Barry, and he's forced to flee to another time period. Number 4. His nephew Wally died. If suffering all this physical and emotional pain wasn't bad enough, Barry has also seen the death of his beloved nephew Wally West. Wally and his aunt are driving, racing to stop Iris's brother from killing the Flash. They end up getting in a car crash on the way, and not wearing seatbelts, the results of the crash are pretty brutal. Iris is left permanently paralyzed and Wally is thrown from the vehicle. Barry arrives to see Wally's lifeless body on the road and Iris being loaded into an ambulance. Flash blames himself for not being able to stop the accident, and the death of Wally sends him into a dark period of sadness and guilt. Number 3. Parents dead. Things weren't always this way. Maybe it was the success of Superman or Batman stories, but either way, when DC rewrote the Flash's backstory in Rebirth, they gave him the old cliche tragic past. In this new version of his history, his mother Nora is brutally murdered when he's a child. Not only that, his father is wrongfully sent to prison for the crime. And if that wasn't bad enough, his father dies in prison before he can be proved innocent, and the Flash goes through it all alone. It's only later in life that he learns it was the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, that murdered Nora and framed his father Henry for the crime to ruin Barry's life. Ironically, the plan backfires, and these events lead to Barry becoming a forensic scientist for the police and then later becoming the hero known as the Flash. Number 2. Returns to the past and allows his mother's death. Alright, we've seen a lot of stuff. How could it possibly be worse? Well, one time, Barry woke up in an alternate reality where his mother is still alive. In the Flashpoint universe, his mother is alive and his father was never framed for murder. It sounds great and Barry gets a nice touching reunion, but there's actually a bunch of other stuff in this universe that's different too. Like Bruce Wayne was killed instead of his parents. On top of that, in this universe, Wonder Woman and Aquaman have basically caused a huge war in Europe, causing massive destruction and devastation. Barry decides he needs to reset the timeline, even though it means losing his mother again. Barry does do the heroic thing in the end, and sacrifices his own happiness to put everything back to normal. Number 1. Sacrificed himself to save the multiverse. In the crossover event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry makes the ultimate sacrifice, his own life. The Anti-Monitor has constructed a giant antimatter cannon to destroy the various Earths, and Barry does what he has to do to stop it. He runs against the antimatter to destroy the weapon, running so fast he's going back through time, reliving his memories as his body disintegrates. The pain becomes so intense at one point that he cries out for help with nobody to hear him. He reminds himself that there is always hope, and he keeps pushing even as his body is breaking down completely. He leaves us with a final message: that we must save the world, and Barry Allen dies a hero. This version of him anyway.
Number 10. Childhood trauma. You might think Peter has some pretty intense childhood trauma himself, and he does, but he's not alone here. MJ also had a rough childhood. She grew up in a home where her family was constantly forced to move because her dad, a professor, always felt the need to take on new jobs and move to new schools. Maybe because he had an anger problem, or as MJ speculated, because he was looking for some kind of satisfaction that he never really could find. This made it hard for MJ to make new friends, but she forced herself to be even more outgoing and charismatic, entertaining her classmates and making everyone fall in love with her. That classic MJ charm. However, what her friends didn't know was at home she and her sister Gail and her mom were suffering. Her father mistreated them and even at one point attacked Gail in front of Mary Jane. Eventually, her mother left her father, but I don't think MJ ever really healed from her trauma. Instead, instead choosing to use her love of performing as a creative outlet and a means of escape. Number 9. Losing her mom. Not only did Mary Jane have a difficult life growing up, but she also lost her mother at a young age, after her father had disappeared from her life, and right around the time her sister had her husband walk out on her, while she was pregnant with their last child. Oh my goodness. The death of her mom took a toll on MJ and served as a wake-up call. Feeling her mother and her sister had both wasted their lives, giving up on their passions to become mothers, she left her sister, moving in with her Aunt Anna in Brooklyn, and decided to pursue her own dreams of becoming a professional actress. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick little reminder to give that like a little click. It really helps us out on the channel, and thank you so much if you've already done so. Number 8. Killed by Love. This one only ranks lower because it is technically from an alternate future, but it's still pretty terrible. In Spider-Man Reign, Mary Jane dies young after getting cancer, which despite it also being implied with her mom to run in her family in terms of her medical history, it is in this case caused by her closeness to Peter Parker himself and all his radioactive fluids. In the end, Peter's radioactivity is the one to blame for Mary Jane's death, and she lives on in his memories, haunting him. We also need to acknowledge how unkind, senile old Peter is to ghost memory MJ, because that is also very much a thing in Spider-Man Reign. In typical Peter fashion, he seems to almost take out his own feelings of guilt on her ghost, having more than a few outbursts that are directed at MJ's non-existent self. Number 7. Worst boyfriend ever. I wish I could say this was a one-time instance, but this is one of the worst, most consistent things that we've seen from Peter Parker throughout all of his relationships. He's not only super awkward around the ladies, but also has a tendency to behave badly with his romantic partners as well. For one, Peter very rarely lets people in on his secret of being Spider-Man, which causes a lot of problems early on in relationships that usually end up causing a breakup before things get super serious. And you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, Amanda, hasn't Peter Parker told Mary Jane before that he's Spider-Man? Yes, but she also apparently knew from like day one that he was Spider-Man, so I don't know if that even counts because she knew the whole time. But beyond that, he also says things and does kind of things that are just in general awful. He snapped at his partners, lied to them, gotten them into all kinds of danger, blamed them for things that weren't their fault, and even at times physically hit them. Like when Mary Jane tried to break up a fight between Peter Parker and his clone Ben Reilly, and in a mindless rage he slammed her back, causing her to go flying into a wall. Also, Spider-Man is super strong, so even if he like flicked Mary Jane, I imagine that would be terribly painful. Oh, and she was also pregnant at the time with their child, which just makes it even worse.
Number 6. He almost robbed a jewelry store. Okay, I know this isn't supposed to be top 10 things Spider-Man almost did, but I have to mention another really weird out of character Spider-Man moment. In Amazing Spider-Man number 87, Spidey has been suffering from an illness that he determines to be the radioactivity in his blood slowly killing him. He's been feeling delirious for a while and having a hard time using his powers properly, and he's swinging around the city, monologuing, wondering what it means for his future. Suddenly, he remembers it's Gwen Stacy's birthday, classic Peter, and he doesn't have a gift. So in a bizarre moment, we see Spider-Man randomly decide to break into a jewelry store and he steals a necklace for her. He realizes what he's doing before it's too late and he kind of like puts it back, but he's already caused property damage and like, you know, thank God they don't have cameras because Jameson would just have a field day with that. The whole thing is just a really weird moment. Spider-Man starting to wonder if he's losing his mind. And the whole thing was really surprising to me, and he almost went through with it.
Number 5, killed MJ. Again! Yeah, for someone who claims to love her so much, Peter is not very good at treating MJ well. This one comes to us from another alternate reality though, so we do have to, you know, asterisk and add that in there, little editor note. Because of course, Peter would never kill Mary Jane in the main continuity, or more, he just hasn't done so yet. In the reality of Spider-Man Reign, we're taken to a potential future reality where Peter killed Mary Jane simply by loving her. Their being intimate, at least that's what's implied, caused Mary Jane to be exposed to Peter's radioactivity at a level where she ended up getting cancer and dying. His radioactive fluids. Yeah, that's pretty intense. In typical Peter fashion, this becomes one of his greatest regrets, giving MJ cancer, and only serves to basically drive him insane and turn him senile, which really doesn't help anyone and makes for a pretty crazy story when he returns as a bizarre and depressed version of Old Man Spider-Man. Old Man Spider-Man is super depressing.
Number 4. Worked for the Jackal. The whole clone saga was definitely one of Spidey's lowest points, especially just the way that they totally messed with Peter's character throughout the whole thing. He was calling himself the Spider and just acting generally unpleasant, but when he found out that he wasn't the real Peter Parker but a clone, he really didn't receive that news very well. The Jackal somehow ends up convincing Pete to work with him, and somehow Peter buys it, even though it means working against his friend Ben Reilly. Peter eventually does come to his senses, but man, how could he have ever been convinced to work with a supervillain in the first place? You know, every time I look back on this era, I remember why people hate it so much. Both versions of Spider-Man are pretty decent, but the way that they're pitted against one another as if there can only be one and everything, the whole thing just felt kind of forced.
Number 3 was too apathetic. Spider-Man's apathy is something that haunts him to this day and makes him pretty much the one to blame for his Uncle Ben's death. Well, I mean, I personally think Peter is much too hard on himself here, and that being that harsh only leads to more disasters later down the road that his intense sense of responsibility has a hand in causing, but I digress. Peter for sure thinks this is the worst thing he has ever done, allowing the man who would go on to kill his uncle to get past him. At the time when the guard who pursued the criminal asked for help, Peter simply didn't see the point in aiding. That wasn't his job, he thought. He wasn't a hero. However, afterward he learned that with great power comes great responsibility, a lesson that has haunted him and continues to both haunt and inspire him to this day.
Number 2. He killed Charlemagne. In the one-shot Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987, we get to witness an epic showdown between these two fan favorites. Peter winds up in Germany investigating a mysterious arms dealer. Charlemagne turns out to be an old associate of Wolverine's, and she's got all kinds of people after her. They track her to East Berlin, where Wolverine plans to kill her, sparing her from being tortured by the KGB. Spider-Man isn't really cool with the whole killing her part of the plan, so the two of them have a bit of a fight about it. However, after a helicopter breaks up the fight for a second, Peter's spidey sense kicks in, and thinking that Wolverine is behind him, he turns around and delivers a full-powered punch, instantly killing Charlemagne. It's implied that she probably intended for this to happen, as she was wanting to die and stuff, but still, if you had told me that Spider-Man once punched a woman with no superpowers and killed her in one hit, I'd be a little skeptical. But it really happened.
Number 1, probably killed Gwen Stacy. Once again, Peter is causing harm to those he loves. What's more, this whole moment where he attempted to save Gwen and we hear her neck snap is made even worse for Peter in terms of his own guilt over the situation by the fact that he never really knows if it was him or if it was Green Goblin who is to blame for her death. Was she dead before he grabbed her, or did she die when his webbing latched on to save her, breaking her neck? We still don't really know for sure, although I think Green Goblin claims that she died while she was falling. He's like, a fall like that, she'd die before she hits the ground. And I'm like, wait, is that how falling works? It's not. Anyways. I mean, either way, Peter Parker is kind of to blame here, as Green Goblin has a tendency to target those that Spider-Man loves. So once again, just loving Gwen was in a way a terrible thing for him to do to her.
Number 10. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers, and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Number 9. Got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. That it's like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 8. Got beaten to near death by the Phoenix Four. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler.
Number 7. Suffered Peter Parker's hostility. There are multiple times that Mary Jane has suffered being emotionally mistreated by Peter, but this moment in retrospect for me is one of the worst. Just after Gwen died, Peter was caught tearfully mourning her by MJ, who had been waiting in Harry and Pete's apartment. She was in a lot of pain at the time, having just heard of Gwen's death and mourning her basically best friend, Gwen, herself. Peter, however, did not want to hear it and insisted his pain was actually greater than hers, and that she couldn't possibly understand how hurt he was. Wow, what a cruel and immature way to respond. Like, I know Peter was hurting, but ouch! MJ did not deserve this. He also goes on to say, "Don't make me laugh, Mary Jane. You wouldn't be sorry if your own mother died." Whew! This stings quite a bit given what we now know of MJ's past, that Mary Jane's mother did die, and that it was extremely painful for her. Granted, Peter might not have known this yet, in fact I'm pretty sure he didn't in terms of continuity, but still, ouch! I'm sure when he found out about that later, he thought back to those words and was like, oh, I was pretty terrible, that was bad. I hope he apologized to her later. Number 6. Fan hate. The fan hate that we see by some is actually seen as being created somewhat by Marvel's hate for her character, depending on who we talk to. So what's really going on here? Why do people hate MJ? Well, there are Spider-Man fans who blame Mary Jane almost exclusively for Gwen's death. Not like a conspiracy theory like, Mary Jane was secretly the Green Goblin or anything weird like that. It's more just that MJ basically caused Gwen to be killed because writers wanted MJ and Peter to be together. And many fans actually would have rather that he stayed with Gwen, who they think is a more suitable fit. So the way they see it, if MJ wasn't around, Gwen would still be around today. Then there are those who criticize her fancy-free lifestyle and just how she's kinda all about having fun. People didn't think that she was serious enough, though really with the context of her history, it's kinda hard to see how people felt this was a problem. That's kinda just part of Mary Jane's characterization, and it makes sense if you know her history. Then there are those who feel she simply isn't well enough written, that she's basically an underdeveloped character without really much depth. Regardless, there is a lot of hate that gets thrown MJ's way that I think in most cases is very undeserved. Let me know what you folks think of this hate in the comments. Number 5. Had her marriage retconned. While this is pretty bad, her relationship with Peter Parker hasn't been all that great, which is why I'm ranking this one so low. Given all that MJ has gone through during her marriage, it might be better honestly if it never happened. Although I'm sure Mary Jane's love of Peter would prevent her from ever agreeing with me. Because yeah, that love is pretty strong, Tiger. Mary Jane and Peter's marriage was the price that Spider-Man was asked to pay Mephisto in exchange for his help in saving Aunt May's life. Rather than let his elderly Aunt May pass away, Peter agreed. Which is pretty crazy considering, Aunt May's really old, so you could've just maybe let her go, but I guess not. And if you're wondering why he didn't ask other people for help here, who are superheroes, magic users, scientists, and or doctors, there's some people I'm sure that are all of those things, he actually did ask them for help, and apparently no one else could help him. This was a truly terrible comics moment, but it happened and it resulted in Peter's and Mary Jane's lives forever being changed. Number 4. Thought dead, then kidnapped. Mary Jane was on a flight to a shoot when the plane exploded and she was presumed dead. For over a year in comics, MJ was simply a ghost, haunting Peter, who truly believed that she was actually gone. In reality, Mary Jane had been kidnapped by a mutant stalker who was obsessed with her and with becoming Spider-Man himself, known only as Stalker. It was revealed that this villain was a mutant who planned to use their telepathic powers to, in essence, become Peter and take over his life. Mary Jane was kept locked away and kidnapped by this villain for months before Spider-Man finally came to rescue her. In the end, she and Peter got away after she managed to knock out her captor using a chair to basically hit Spidey, which, because Stalker was psychically linked to him, hurt him more than it did Peter, who obviously is much more resilient, I'm sure, than Stalker. The whole thing, I feel like, should have really taken more of a toll on just about everyone involved, but hey, comics, so I feel like we never really talk about it again. Number 3. Terrorized by Venom. One of the moments that caused a lot of grief and trauma for MJ took place when she was completely terrified by Venom's appearance and presence. Not only was MJ left almost broken by the experience, almost perpetually and severely afraid of the villain, but this wouldn't be the last that she'd see of Venom either. Venom has not only terrified MJ in the main continuity, but he has also done so in alternate universes too, where he has targeted both her and other members of Peter's and generally also MJ's family together. Due to her intensely negative relationship with the symbiote, fans even were initially triggered at the sight of the black suit when we were given a variant cover featuring MJ bonded with the symbiote in place of Eddie Brock. This was intended to celebrate MJ, but it definitely stirred up some mixed feelings for many of her fans. Although it is a cool variant, it does look cool, I will say. Number 2. Assassination attempt. We all talk about when Peter hit Mary Jane in the midst of a fight between him and Ben, but few people seem to recall that Peter also tried to kill Mary Jane during the events of the Clone Saga. So it wasn't necessarily his fault here, as he was programmed, brainwashed into doing so by the Jackal, but it still makes for a horrific experience for Mary Jane either way, who at the time was also pregnant with their child. Terrified, she was forced to flee from Peter, running for her life and seeking help from anyone she could find, any of Spider-Man's hopefully superpowered allies. Basically, the Clone Saga was just a really hard time for MJ and pretty much everyone else. It was just a hard time. Number 1. Baby was taken. One of the worst things to ever happen to MJ was when she was tricked into believing that her and Peter's baby was born stillborn. Mary Jane had a complicated and challenging pregnancy, and it was even implied that her baby would be born with powers, or develop them over time, possibly even being born a mutant. While out at a restaurant, Allison Mongrain, working for Norman Osborn, slipped something into Mary Jane's food, which resulted in her going into labor. She was then told the baby that she gave birth to was actually stillborn, when in reality the baby was not dead but lived and was kidnapped by Mongrain and delivered to Osborn, who paid her to take the baby away to Europe, never to be seen or heard from again. It's later suggested the child perished, but there isn't really much explanation as to why Osborn did this, especially so secretly, without MJ and Peter really ever learning of what truly happened till much later. It more feels like this was part of an unresolved plot that someone was writing, and the writers just really didn't want the young couple to start a family, so they were like, I guess we'll just leave this, and their baby's gone. The end.
Number 10. Drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are two things you never want to happen to you, in that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. Worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron, so it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's alright, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. "Damn you," Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said "damn you" to you, you'd be like, "Oh, please." And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, "You can kill Aunt May, you've earned it."
You earned a pardon.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it. Here you go.
Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man. Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate in fact that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through. Number 5. Became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has got to be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe. Number 4. Killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people, but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up. Number 3. Became one of the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour. Number 2. Ben, the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, devourer of totems, on a mission to destroy all spider-folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims' tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other spider totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the Spider Army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it. Yeesh.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by Craven. In the storyline Craven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So Craven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with his plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So Craven buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, Craven's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted Craven, Craven was like, "No way, buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And Craven releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Craven intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. Clones. The Clone Saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The Clone Saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and the Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up the story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You get what you got. Number 7, Impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal, and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6, he loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour, I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. We look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event. This was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, to have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. Like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
Yeah. You made a delicious sandwich. So did you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion, and police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times, it's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. And gaff's barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne The Rock Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1. Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out, and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw, in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last-minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. Number 10, One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, The Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8. Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. And coming up at number 7, Hit by a Train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he's seeing is real, but what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again. You love to see it, we also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new, not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. More girl problems. Peter in his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right, physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. You gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4, the deal with the devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison. But still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. And instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married, and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, so everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is a plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war, and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing, you got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mixed DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, number 1, he gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learn a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, ha, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah. That's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great.
Number 10. His fiance had a nervous breakdown. Barry Allen has had a few love interests in his lifetime, and Fiona Webb is a prominent one. They fall in love after Iris West, and Barry eventually asks Fiona to marry him. However, when their special day finally comes around, old Professor Zoom shows up and ruins everything. He almost succeeds in killing Fiona. When Barry is busy fighting Zoom as the Flash, he fails to show up at the altar in time, and Fiona thinks he's a runaway groom. The horror and stress of it all sends her over the edge, and she has a breakdown. She winds up getting committed to the hospital as her mental state deteriorates, and it's made even worse when Barry decides to come visit. See, he uses his speed powers to bypass hospital security to visit her, and he doesn't show up on the hospital videotapes, so they think she's crazy when she mentions that the Flash came to visit her. She winds up smashing herself in the face with a picture of Barry and getting carted off on a stretcher, presumably to a padded room. And that's only number 10, folks. The Flash really has a rough time. Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you take a second and hit that like button. Number 9. He let crime run rampant in Central City. In 1987, DC released The Flash issue number 200, in which Wally has his secret identity revealed. He's pretty upset with the public's newfound knowledge of him because he knows the considerable danger this poses to his friends and his loved ones. He winds up taking an offer from Spectre to wipe the general public's memory of the Flash, including his own. In the final pages of this comic, we see the full ramifications of this decision. Wally and everyone else has completely forgotten the identity of the Flash, or whatever happened to him. This comic even explicitly states that the loss of the Flash caused a significant increase in the crime rates in Central City. Countless people suffer and possibly die without a hero patrolling the streets. It's a pretty grim look at things, but perhaps Wally regains his memory later in time? I don't really want to ruin anything for you guys. Let's keep on rolling. Number 8. His brother became a supervillain. Surely almost everybody knows Barry Allen, but there is another, Malcolm Allen. Barry has a secret twin brother who he originally thought died in birth. However, when these two come face to face, it was far from a happy reunion. Malcolm was secretly given to a family of abusive con artists with superpowers, and they constantly taunted him for being inferior while they raised him. Man, that is really messed up. Like, why would you adopt a kid and then just give him a hard time for not being good enough? Like, this is the kid that you picked. Anyway, by the time Malcolm tracks down Barry, he's pretty angry and envious of Barry's life, as you can imagine, and so he vows to kill Barry and everything he holds dear. His adoptive grandmother teaches him how to use the family superpowers, and so he reinvents himself as the supervillain Cobalt Blue. It's not the Flash's fault or anything, it's just another of the many hard knocks the Flash suffers throughout his life. Psychotic vengeful brother? Check. Number 7. Forced to fight his own grandson. How about psychotic vengeful grandson from the future? Also check. During the crossover called Blackest Night, the villain Necron reanimated dead DC characters with some black power rings and created a zombie army of Black Lanterns. Bart Allen is Barry's grandson, who recently died and was resurrected. Barry has temporarily become a Blue Lantern during this event, and he has to face off against his evil grandson. When the two do battle in a graveyard, Bart shows his resentment as he cruelly taunts Barry while the two of them fight. Barry tries to remove the black ring, but is interrupted by an undead version of Reverse Flash. Barry manages to connect with the living Bart beneath the surface by contacting him inside the Speed Force, and they have a really wholesome reunion. Barry owns up to his neglect as he guides Bart through the process of breaking free from the control of the ring. It's a really heartwarming moment.
Number 6. Joker kills the audience. This moment also mirrors what happened in the finale of the Todd Phillips Joker movie, so I gotta bring it up. It's like 2 birds, 1 stone, bam bam. So in Batman The Dark Knight Returns Part 2, Joker is invited on a talk show to get some insight behind his madness, which is always a great idea. Let's bring those people around. Ellen, like, hey, check under your seats, it's a knife. No. So stupid. After being asked by the host why he kills people, Joker explains how he's going to kill everybody in the room, and cue the panic laughs. What did he say? So Joker begins to explain that he thinks he's Batman's psychotic obsession. And then after asking about the lovely mugs that guests get to drink from on the show, the Joker then breaks the mug and then stabs Dr. Bartholomew in the neck, who was aiding Joker for this interview. Yeah, not so cured after all, I guess. And then if that wasn't bad enough, he then murdered the entire audience with a poisonous gas.
Adam is a patient. Do guests get to keep these?
Sure, you do whatever you want with it. We got a closet full of them.
So similar in nature, yet I feel like this is worse. I don't know, like everyone else dying and getting poisoned, it's crazy. I also feel like Joaquin Phoenix is more awkward on a talk show than the Joker. I mean, watch any interview with him and you'll be like, no, for sure, definitely. Number 5, Emperor Joker. So this is a form of the Joker that is bigger and badder than ever. And it comes from Superman Emperor Joker back in 2000. And it was a 9-issue crossover event that shows what happens when the Joker steals the powers of Mr. Mxyzptlk, which is spelled so differently. I had to like write it in like, you know, a dictionary where it like breaks it down. Mr. Mxyzptlk. Yeah, he was supposed to get only 1% of his reality warping power, but he ended up tricking him into giving the Joker 99.9% power. Oops! So what happens when an imp from a 5th dimension accidentally makes Gotham's worst a god? Well, he eats China. That's a body count that's over 1 billion right there. I mean, the Joker transformed reality into this horrible version that better suited himself, where everybody's stuck in an awful loop. He kills Lex Luthor over and over again, and of course he makes Batman suffer death daily. Number 4, Harley Quinn. Making her first appearance in Batman Adventures issue 12, Harleen Quinzel, Adele Dazeem. Most commonly seen as the Joker's love life and twisted partner in crime, started off as an intern psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum. And then in the 1994 graphic novel, The Batman Adventures Mad Love, I don't know why I did that, Mad Love, we see Harleen's origin play out. So Dr. Harleen Frances Quinzel started to fall in love with the Madman as the days went by, because of course. It's an amazing graphic novel. It actually won the Eisner and Harvey Awards for Best Single Issue Comic of the Year. So if you haven't read it, check it out, it's great. She becomes intrigued with how the Joker's mind works, so she volunteers to help treat him. Now, after helping him escape numerous times, it's no surprise she became his sidekick, donning a jester suit of her own. And I like where they're going with Birds of Prey, giving her more of the spotlight rather than just this crazy sidekick to the Joker. And also, if I see any more of Jared Leto's Joker, I'm gonna bleach my eyes. That damaged tattoo on his forehead almost got the next spot on this list, I swear. Number 3, Barbara Gordon. This next one hurts me to talk about. Here we go. So The Killing Joke was brought to us by Alan Moore back in 1988, and since its debut, it's referred to as one of the best graphic novels ever published. Fair. So we have this background story for the Joker unfold as he torments the Gordon family, and then it comes down to a few knocks on the door that changes Barbara's life forever. So she thinks that it's Colleen arriving early, and then she goes over slowly, and then does that thing in horror movies, you know, where they open the door mid-conversation, not aware, and then they turn last second, and then bam! This happens.
Yeah, well, I had some really interesting nightmares.
The animated movie didn't get the same raving reviews as the novel, and most reviewers agree that the movie built up all this backstory for Barbara just to be a plot device for Bruce's story. Yeah, she gets sacrificed in order for Batman to grow. Like, nobody was ever doubting the Joker would do something like this. I mean, guy ate China. So fans almost write the first 30 minutes off of what's otherwise a pretty solid time with the likes of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill voicing this adaptation. Number 2, beat Jason Todd. A Death in the Family, not to be confused with A Death of the Family, is a 4-part storyline written by Jim Starlin and published in 1988. Now, this was a huge moment in the Bat story because we see the Joker beat the second coming of Robin, Jason Todd, like to death. This actually came to life thanks to the producers allowing the readers to decide what happens next to the boy wonder. And they chose death. He beat him with a crowbar and then a bomb ended it all. Like the Joker used Jason's mother, he blackmailed her and then used her to get to Jason and then killed her off too. So dark. What's even crazier about this whole thing is that it was up to the fans to decide his fate. There was a 36-hour period from September 16th to 17th in 1988, and there was a number you could call in and vote if you wanted the Joker to kill Robin or not. That's like the weirdest reality show ever. Like dialing one number meant death, dialing the other meant survival. And it got really close too. It was almost like 50-50. God, I wish callers had to talk to somebody instead of just calling a number. That would be amazing. Yeah, hi. You know what? Death. I think, oh wait, no, death, for sure death. Thanks, awesome, sick, cheers. So one caller actually admitted to dialing the number numerous times just to put the nail in the coffin for the boy wonder. Yep, it worked. Hope you're happy. Hope you're 90 years old and also happy. And finally, number 1, killed Jim Gordon's wife. Yes, this next one takes place during the holidays, so how fitting and joyous. Making her first appearance in Batman 405, the Year 1 storyline, we find Sarah Essen, Lieutenant Gordon's partner. So after Gordon's divorce, the two of them started to date and eventually they got married. Classic detective stuff. This all sounds lovely so far, but then in Detective Comics 741, we find the Joker after he's kidnapped like dozens of babies. Like I'm talking, this guy kidnapped a bunch of babies and then decided to hide them right in the basement of the Gotham police station, which in my opinion is the worst place to hide anything ever. End of story. So Sarah hears over the radio, Joker has the babies at Central, and she's like, what the f? And then she gets out of there, and then we see him in there talking to one of these babies while he's holding it, saying sweet things, you know, like how life is the biggest joke of all. Sweet things like that. So Sarah makes a loud entrance, tells the Joker to freeze, and Joker tosses the baby at her like hot potato. He tosses an infant, and then Sarah catches the baby, thank God, but then Joker wishes her a Merry Christmas and delivers, bow, a fatal bullet. But the baby's okay, but Sarah, not okay.
Number 10, wanted by everyone, and not in a good way. In Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, Batman is a wanted man as in for illegal activities, or things that people are deeming illegal then. I mean, technically if you're a vigilante, it's all pretty illegal. He's wanted not just by the police as well, but also by the government. With Superman also now in the president's pocket, this also means that Bruce is up against one of his best friends, Kal-El, also one of the most powerful superheroes in DC Comics. So there's that. It seems in Dark Knight Returns everyone is against old man Batman, even at times himself. Of course, that is what makes the story so good. One of our favorite things to read about when it comes to Batman comics usually is how Batman must struggle against the odds and overcome not only the adversity of everyone against him, but at times himself, or his old age as well in this case. It's hard getting older every day. Slowly moving towards death. It's fine. Number 9 made a massive mistake. I mean, this had to have hurt Bruce's ego, go, I imagine, at the very least. Following Batman having his back broken by Bane, snapped over Bane's knee like some twig, Batman was forced into a temporary retirement while he recovered. Who should he choose for his replacement while he was gone? But none other than Jean-Paul Valley. While this was thought to be an odd choice at the time, considering, you know, he'd been training Robins to, you'd think, eventually take over for him when needed, he had his reasons, which he would later on even explain at length. However, it turned out that picking Azrael to step into his shoes wasn't necessarily the best choice, considering that being Batman basically turned Azrael crazy and sent him down a pretty dark path for a good amount of time afterward. When Bruce returned, he along with Nightwing and Robin, who was Tim Drake at the time, were forced to confront Azrael and make him surrender the cape and cowl. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love Batman as much as I love Batman, I said that weird, then you should give this video a thumbs up. Also, if you like when I sometimes forget what I'm saying and talk weird, I think we deserve multiple thumbs up for that, to be honest. Number 8. Contingencies used against him. During the Tower of Babel story arc, Batman had his many contingency plans used against him when Ra's al Ghul managed to get his hands on them. The ones Ra's was particularly focused on here were those that would allow him to disable the Justice League. Batman had a backup plan ready should any member of the League go rogue, keeping a file on each of them and devising a failsafe involving their weaknesses being used against them. Ra's enacts all of Batman's contingencies, nearly killing the Justice League, and manages to distract Batman long enough by using his parents' corpses as bait. Although the Justice League did manage to win the day against Ra's, this also created a lot of tension between Batman and the rest of the team, and resulted in him being voted off. Said that like it was like Survivor. He's getting voted off the island. The Justice League Island. I would watch actually Justice League of America if it was like a reality Survivor show. That'd be cool. Someone write that down. Number 7. Dick Grayson quits. A lot of the depictions of Dick Grayson moving from the role of Robin to Nightwing are awesome, and even show a sense of maturity and progression when it comes to the relationship that Dick and Bruce have. However, Dick leaving the Robin mantle hasn't always been the most peaceful of resignations.
To tell you. But it was your place to put her in danger.
It wasn't like that. I volunteered.
You think you did. You don't know him like I do. He manipulates.
In fact, in the Batman animated series, Dick outright quits being Robin and resigns with a punch straight to Batman's face.
Things change. I changed. The game's over, Batman. I quit.
Robin, wait.
It was like the weakest punch ever. Gotta really throw your body into it. Calling Batman out for being underhanded and manipulative when it comes to how he treats his proteges.
Number 6. Attacked by his future self. Now what if Barry did battle against a psychotic, vengeful version of himself? This has also happened, and just another great example of the many struggles of the Flash. Not only does he deal with some super heavy duty villains and storylines, but being a speedster, he's also constantly battling against the past and the future half of the time. In this storyline, we're introduced to a whole new future Barry. After a devastating accident that basically ruins his life, we meet future Barry. It's 20 years into the future, in fact. He's become really hardcore and a little bit unstable. We even see him throw a dude off of a roof and leave one villain to die after a fight. Worse, he discovers a rip in the Speed Force and decides the only way to set it right is to kill his younger self to repair the rip. He drags our Barry from his home and proceeds to beat him to death outside of the city. The young Barry doesn't even stand a chance against his older counterpart, who has been trained by the best in the DC universe. Just when the future Barry is about to break his neck, a future version of Wally West shows up and saves him. With the rip in the Speed Force getting worse, Wally winds up sacrificing himself in the end, and future Barry is left alone, having lost his nephew and sort of become evil. Number 5. He became the Black Flash. The Black Flash is the representation of death for anyone connected to the Speed Force. Once the Black Flash catches up with the speedster, they immediately die. It's like regular death, except it catches up with you a lot faster. When Barry Allen is chasing down the evil speedster Savitar, he reaches out to grab him, and to his surprise, the villain crumbles to dust the moment he is touched. Later, another speedster is turned to dust by Barry's touch, and he realizes he is to blame. Something is wrong with him. He and Wally later on discover that he's been turned into the Black Flash. As his mind and body are slowly taken over by the Black Flash entity, he does the only thing he can. He runs back to the Speed Force, where he was once trapped for years. Even Superman tries to get him to stop, but he fails, and Barry sacrifices himself to save everyone. Again. Number 4. He had to break out of prison. In The Flash number 164, we got to see the Flash kind of go buck wild in a prison and kick the snot out of some guards. It's not the usual scene for a superhero, but it was pretty neat. What's really wild is, we later learn that the guards are actually only trying to imprison the Flash because he is in a mirror dimension where he doesn't actually exist. In this world, anyone with superpowers is evil, so they obviously don't trust old Wally West. The thing that's wild about this is, Wally could have maybe tried to explain himself. I know the guards likely would have been having none of his crap and would have laid the beat down anyways, but isn't being a hero kind of about asking questions first and butt kicking second? I guess it depends on which superhero you ask. Anyways, whether you find it justifiable or not, Wally really puts the hurt on a whole bunch of guards in this comic, and I suspect he could have escaped without causing quite so much collateral damage. Number 3. He is sued for letting a woman burn. This one comes from 1989 in The Flash number 89. This story is focused around the limitations of the Flash's speed-based abilities. The Flash is actually in court in this issue, being sued for negligence in the case of a woman who tragically lost her legs in a building fire. Initially, readers are made to sympathize with the Flash because it's presumed that he just didn't see her or something. However, Flash later reveals that he feels like he did have enough time to look for her, and by focusing on other things, he left an innocent woman in a situation where she likely would have died. It's a pretty unique story where we see the weight and responsibility of a superhero's day-to-day decisions, and we also bear witness to the potential for tragedy that lies in every choice a superhero makes. Number 2. He messed with the space-time continuum. Dude, if there's any one takeaway from all this speedster stuff, not to mention decades of movies and stories about time travel, it's that you never mess with the time-space continuum. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but the one thing we all understand is you're not supposed to mess with it. In part 1 of this video, we mentioned how Barry's mother was murdered and his father was framed for it. Well, Barry Allen once tried to go back in time and save his mother, and it caused the entire Flashpoint event. It was an act with obviously good intentions, but man, the implications were seriously unsustainable. You think Barry would understand the potential for catastrophe in this kind of time-traveling nonsense, but he just gives it the old college try anyways. As you can imagine, it doesn't really work out the way Flash wanted in the end. Number 1. Trapped Zoom in his worst memory. Leading up to The Flash number 200, published in 2003, Wally had been in battle against the insane speedster Zoom for the past few issues. Enlisting every speedster who would join, Wally borrowed their speed to aid him in his fight against Zoom. Despite this incredible newfound power, it's all Wally can do to keep up with Zoom as the two of them fight. In the midst of the battle, Zoom attacks Linda, Wally's wife at the time, releasing a sonic boom that injures her and ends the lives of babies in her womb. As you can imagine, Wally is really overcome with emotion because of this, and he gets a boost of rage and finally catches Zoom and finishes the battle. In the heat of the moment, he basically forces the villain through a rift in time, trapping him in an endless loop in a moment from the past. We see Zoom later, trapped in a tube, endlessly reliving the worst moment of his life. So Nerd Squad.
Kicking off the list at number 10. The Flying Graysons. Of course, we have to start here, right at the beginning. When he was just 12 years old, Dick Grayson was a circus acrobat, and he was part of his family's act named the Flying Graysons of the Haley Circus. When they were on tour in Gotham City, Dick overheard crime lord Tony Zuko threaten the livelihood of the performers over extortion money. The owner refused, and then later that night, Dick had to watch his parents fall to their deaths due to a wire snap. So he grew up, of course, feeling responsible for his parents' death. Similar to Bruce Wayne's origin, this was just the beginning. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and give us a thumbs up down below because it helps out the channel so much, you have no idea. You guys are the best ever. Thank you so much for watching and being part of the team. Now back to number 9. Number 9, Bullied. So following the tragic events of the Flying Graysons, Dick had to be sent away to a horrible juvenile service system. due to the fact that social services were full. This wasn't a great place by any means. I mean, he was beaten up by other kids. I mean, talk about things going from bad to worse. First, he has to watch his parents die, and then he gets put in a place that he desperately tries to escape after not being there long at all. Poor kid. So during this first attempted getaway, he came across Batman, who talked to Dick and promised him that he wouldn't be there much longer. Now this turned out to be true, seeing as shortly after, he had a foster parent named Mr. Wayne, and he says they both have a lot in common. Number 8, Robin vs. Robin. Following Infinite Crisis, Brothers in Blood is a Nightwing storyline that's part of the 1 year later event. So Dick Grayson moves to New York, and then he sees another Nightwing is there, and he's taking care of criminals in a much more nasty, brutal way. I mean, like, much, much darker. So who could this be? The suited up Dick Grayson is then approached by the fake Nightwing, who turns out to be none other than Red Hood, Jason Todd. So of course they fight, and Dick Grayson is knocked off of a building, with Jason Todd of course preaching how much more the city of New York liked his take on the Nightwing mantle. You know, with shooting and stabbing New York's criminals, you know, rather than putting them in jail and not shooting or stabbing said criminals. So the pair ended up fighting again, and Jason Todd won again. The two ended up teaming together, but I mean, seeing Robin versus Robin, that's one we don't get sick of seeing. Number 7, he got fired. Getting fired is the worst, especially if you're a super crime fighter, okay? This is war, Dick. Robin is my second, my lieutenant. Anything less than total devotion to this cause is simply wasting my time. I'll say it again, Dick. You're fired. Get out of my cave. And cue the dramatic music. The tribe has spoken. Get out of here. So Robin, aka Dick Grayson, came back as Nightwing in 1984 after he was fired from the role of Robin. See, initially Batman decided that he wasn't fitting for the role. So in Nightwing Year 1, Part 1 of 6, we see this unfold back at the cave, where Bruce delivers the 2 words that echoed in his head. You're fired. Well, as the issue says, one door closes and another one opens.
Number 6, Fortune Stolen. During one of the recent Batman events, Joker War, Batman had his entire fortune taken away from him. This obviously is a pretty intense blow to Bats and leaves him in not a great place. For Batman, a lot of what makes him Batman is his fortune. Or at least that's kind of what we've been led to believe. In the end, Batman comes out of this stronger, realizing despite being widely thought of as an iconic lone wolf, that it's really his Bat family and his allies that make him strong. That, and you know, all the skills he's worked to hone throughout the years. However, even after the events of Joker War, Batman still does not reclaim his fortune, choosing to leave it instead with Lucius Fox, who he says has earned it for his years of loyalty and service, and who also deserves it just for, well, everything he suffered in Joker War, let's be real. Lucius tells Bruce that he no longer wants to help him as Batman, and says that if he wants to continue, basically he'll be going alone, without even any financial support from Fox. This obviously changes a lot of what Batman should be capable of in the future, and should also create even more challenges and adversity for him moving forward. Number 5, Omega Beams to the face! Well, to the whole thing, really. Not just to the face. Although this didn't end up actually killing Batman at the time we thought it had, and it was pretty intense. Let's also acknowledge as well what came before the moment Darkseid let loose on those Omega Beams. Batman ended up being taken and tortured by Darkseid, refusing to break before they had their face off. When they did, it was because Batman had the one weapon that was known to be capable of defeating Darkseid, a gun loaded with a lethal Radion bullet. He coolly explains to Darkseid why he's prepared to break his moral code and kill him before firing, knowing that Darkseid would definitely obliterate him with Omega Beams, which he did, but not before Batman would be able to fire off that deadly shot, which he also did. While we thought the Omega Beams had killed Batman, they actually sent him back to the past, but at the time, readers had thought they just witnessed a pretty gnarly Batman death. We won't talk about the past stuff because that's pretty weird, so we'll just leave that alone. Sweep that under the comic book rug. Number 4, Torture of Tim Drake. I've said it once and I'll say it again. If you want to hurt Batman, the best place to start is by hurting those that he cares for, especially considering how hard it is to actually hurt the Bat himself. He's literally spent years training his mind, his body, and his spirit to prevent anyone from being able to do so after all. Unfortunately, his proteges don't have as much experience, which tends to make them a little more vulnerable. Even the ones who are considered to have a mind to rival even Bruce's, like Tim Drake. Granted, the animated version of Tim Drake, which is the version here who suffered, was more of a combination of both Jason Todd and Tim Drake when it came to the character's personality and appearance. The animated version of Tim Drake ended up tortured non-stop for days on end after being kidnapped by Harley Quinn and the Joker. After they had gotten everything they wanted out of him, they didn't stop there either. The Joker and Harley then decided to brainwash him into becoming a mini Joker, rebranding Tim as their son, Joker Jr. It sounds adorable, but it's not. Number 3, death of spoiler. I don't think this one was just hard for Batman actually, but a lot of Batman fans out there besides. Especially those who are also hardcore fans of New Robin, aka Spoiler, aka Stephanie Brown. Many fans hated how Stephanie went here, though fortunately since then we have seen Stephanie return and basically seen her history rewritten, so at least there is a little sense of redemption for a character there. Yay! Stephanie Brown as Spoiler was captured by Black Mask during the events of War Games, and was then tortured to the brink of her breaking point. While Black Mask's main aim was information, and a little fun I assume. He does tend to enjoy his torture sessions, cause he's completely crazy like that. This all happened because Stephanie attempted to initiate one of Batman's contingency plans involving Matches Malone during Batman's absence, not knowing that Malone was actually Batman himself. Oops. Stephanie managed to escape but was unable to bring herself to kill Black Mask despite all he'd done to her. In the end, Stephanie got away, but at the cost of her own life after Black Mask gained the upper hand, shot her in the back, and then pushed her down a flight of stairs before letting her go. She died as a result of her injuries, which I don't think is a surprise considering all that stuff that happened. I'm traumatized just thinking about it. Number 2, loss of his family. For this point, we're moving over to Flashpoint Batman, who honestly I think has it even worse off than Bruce to start. In the Flashpoint continuity, it's Thomas, Bruce's father, who ends up as Batman after the death of his son Bruce, during an alleyway robbery gone wrong. That's right, it's Bruce that dies here instead of his parents. Not only that, but after Bruce's death, Thomas's wife Martha is driven insane by the loss of her son, not able to move past her son's death and recover. Instead, she ends up giving herself a Glasgow smile in response to a comment Thomas made about missing her smile. Aww. And goes on to become his nemesis, the Joker. When Martha learns of an alternate reality where Bruce lives on to become Batman, and where his one true nemesis is the person she herself has now become, she cannot live with herself and she takes her own life. The whole thing is pretty bleak, and Thomas has to do his best to deal with all this while trying to fight crime, make his Gotham better, and help Wally West to basically fix the universe. Number 1, death of Damian Wayne. On part 1 of this list, we talked about the death of another Robin, Jason Todd. And while all of Batman's Robins usually end up being like surrogate sons to Bruce, and I'm sure in his mind are all equal, I don't think he was ever prepared for his biological son to perish like Jason had. But maybe worse? I don't know. Honestly, dying in an even more twisty way, at least in my opinion, than Jason. Damian was killed by the Heretic after being caught up in a massive fight with Leviathan goons. The really tragic thing was that right before his death, the story also paid some tribute to Damian's growth, with him and Nightwing kind of sharing a brotherly moment before he is forced to face off with the Heretic and dies as a result. Oh yeah, also after he's like, I promised my dad I wouldn't kill anymore. Ah! Batman arrives too late to the scene where Damian already lays dead. The crazy part is the Heretic would turn out to be a clone of Damian, and this would all end up being part of a plot engineered by none other than Talia al Ghul, and more prominently, her father, Ra's.
Number 10. Robin the Vampire. Ever since I saw The Little Vampire with Jonathan Lipnicki, the Stuart Little kid,
we want to become humans, not eat them for dinner.
I've wanted to low-key be a vampire like every single day, whatever. But what if I told you that Robin turned into a vampire and it was all because of Batman? Yeah, we look now into the Batman and Robin Dracula trilogy, where Dick Grayson has become obsessed with killing Batman after he murdered his parents, because you know, the whole vampire thing. So he finds this Batman, literally half man, half bat, and he finds his crypt, and he just can't bring himself to kill Batman. He just can't do it. He's too much of a good person in there. So then Batman turns him into a vampire. Hey, if you can't beat him, join him. And before we go to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and toss this video a thumbs up down there, it would be great. It helps our channel out a lot. I'm in a closet right now. Like the video, it'll just do all good. It'll do wonders. Now back to this crazy list. Number 9. bat slapped. Okay, I'm gonna start this list off mostly with Dick's origin because it's quite crucial in some of these choices that he makes down the road, further on in this list. You kind of need to know that first. Following the tragic events of the Flying Graysons, Dick had to be sent away to a horrible juvenile service system due to the fact that social services were full. This wasn't an ideal home for a young child. He was beaten up by other kids. It was just not a place you want to be, to say the least. So it didn't take long for him to try and, of course, make a break for it. So during this getaway, he came across Batman, who talked to Dick and promised him that he wouldn't be there much longer in that horrible living situation. This turned out to be very true, seeing as shortly after he had a foster parent named Mr. Wayne, who says they both have a lot in common. So his luck's turned around, how amazing. So Batman is also the same guy who kicked him out of said new home in World's Finest issue 153. The bat slap, here we go. As if getting slapped by Batman wasn't bad enough, Bruce actually wiped Dick's memory and then sent him back to an orphanage. All because Dick thought Batman was in the wrong for trying to kill Superman. So next time you want to remind Batman that killing is, still a bad thing, you might just get slapped across the face for it. So be careful. Tread lightly, Boy Wonder. Even if it's an imagination story, you're still gonna get slapped. Number 8, Dick Grayson got fired. If you've ever been fired from a job, first of all, it happens. Grab a milkshake on the way home, reflect a little, brush it off, you'll be all right. But that's, getting fired by Batman, that's an L. You took a big L. But if you get fired by Batman, you can't even put that on a resume. That's just a huge empty spot. You can't tell anyone. Says here you did nothing for 6 years. This is war, Dick. Robin is my second, my lieutenant. Anything less than total devotion to the cause is simply wasting my time. I'll say it again, you're fired. Oof, okay, Batman said that to me, my soul would crush. Every night I'd hear those words over and over in my head. Well, it all happens in Nightwing year 1. Bruce finds out that Dick has been working part-time for the Teen Titans, so he delivers that line, fires him, because he's not totally committed. I mean, that's fair, but also, I know Batman's got his system going on, but that's a pretty good route that he's on. Luckily Dick went on to become Nightwing, and the two of them work it out eventually as time goes on, but I feel like we could have salvaged lots of time and heartache for this poor kid. Number 7, fought by Robin? Robin fighting another Robin. Things are bound to get a little messy. Following Infinite Crisis, Brothers in Blood is a Nightwing storyline that's part of the 1 year later event. So Dick Grayson moves to New York and then he sees there's a Nightwing there.
That's suspicious.
And he's taking care of criminals, but only in a much more brutal way. Much, much darker. So who is this? What's going on here? Well, the suited up Dick Grayson is then approached by the crazier Nightwing, who turns out to be none other than, you guessed it, Jason Todd. So of course they fight and Dick Grayson is knocked off the building, and with Jason Todd of course bragging the whole time of how he's the best fighter ever and how the city loves him so much more in the way he's doing things, with shooting and stabbing people rather than slapping some handcuffs on them. So the pair ended up fighting again after this, and Jason Todd won again. They ended up teaming together, but falling off a building and fighting each other was a bad day for not only one Robin, but both of them. I also love how Jason suited up in an old costume to just deliver the point even harder.
Give it up, bro.
Number 6, he gets sent to an orphanage. So while I previously mentioned how Batman got Dick out of a hostile living situation with other kids, Batman is also the same guy who would kick him out in World's Finest issue 153. So although it's an imagination story, we still got to see the birth of a popular meme. The bat slap. As if getting slapped by Batman wasn't bad enough, Bruce actually wiped Dick's memory and sent him to an orphanage. All because Dick thought Batman was in the wrong for trying to kill Superman. See, sometimes taking the high road just gets you slapped. It's, it's part of the hero gig. Number 5, the helicopter crash. So in issue 147 of Nightwing, we see Harvey Two-Face Dent do a little good for Dick Grayson. So this is after Batman had apparently died. So Two-Face tips off Nightwing on a young woman named Carol Benjamin who needed help. So Nightwing swoops in to save the day. While trying to help her get to safety via a helicopter, bullets start to fly in from the darkness, and officers are being taken out left, right, and center. So while the helicopter is going down, Nightwing saves Carol right at the last second, but not without getting hurt during the process. Don't worry, that's not your blood, he says. It's mine. And there's quite a bit of blood. Number 4, shot by the Joker. Being the sidekick to Batman sounds like the greatest gig ever, but eventually I'm sure you want to go about your own way. So when he was just 17 years old, Dick Grayson was actually shot in the shoulder by the Joker. So Batman decided that would be a perfect time to end his crime-fighting days. Well, this might have been just the push that he needed, because that's when Dick donned this new Nightwing persona in the first place. He came back stronger and ready to go. All it took was a nice bullet in the shoulder to get things in motion. Number 3, shot. Again. So during the Batman War Games storyline, Act 3, Part 3, Dick is shot. Again. He actually gets shot quite a bit. Each, I imagine, gets more painful than the previous. I don't think that's a feeling you get used to, like tattoos, I don't know. So Gotham City is not a safe place at all during this storyline, obviously. Chaos has erupted with villains like Black Mask, Killer Croc, and Tarantula trying to bid control over the city. So there was an order from a new police commissioner to shoot anybody in costume. That includes Nightwing. So while he was scrapping it out with Firefly, a Gotham City police officer took his shot and nailed Nightwing right in the leg. Number 2, beaten up by Two-Face. The first year of any job can have its hiccups. For the boy Wonder, those hiccups left scars and bruises, evidently. So in Robin Year 1, Issue 2, we see Robin try and save Batman and the DA of Gotham. He gets restrained and he watches as Two-Face flips a coin to decide the DA's fate. But the deal, of course, is still a lose-lose. After cutting the DA free, they proceeded to fall into water and drown. And after that, he beats Robin to a pulp, all while Batman has to stand there tied up and watch the whole thing. And finally, number 1, shot in the head. Okay, we got bullets being fired into shoulders, legs, but this last one, it's gotta be the worst. It has to be the worst. We jump over now to Batman issue 55, where we see Nightwing and Batman patrolling Gotham City as usual. Nightwing playfully challenges Batman to a contest. Whoever jumps off the building and shoots their grapple gun first loses. It's kind of like a let's see who can get closest to the bottom. So Batman eventually agrees. They make the dive and Nightwing technically wins because Batman breaks early to attend the bat symbol. Still a win. I mean, we love games, right? Well, at the same time Nightwing and Batman were talking to Jim Gordon, KG Beast was taking aim at Nightwing's head. And then, bam, a bullet strikes Dick's head, and he wasn't the same afterwards. Fun grapple games, and then minutes later, serious brain trauma. The bad luck never ends with this guy. God.
Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Patilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's a million times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petruski, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man. All with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
And coming in at number 8, we have Stegron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Stegron was originally Dr. Vincent Stegron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around, they all went to sleep, including Stegron. If you're picking your superpower, you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there, you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want, and the state would probably be fine with it.
Number 7. Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Since Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well. And after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter of course feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me."
Number 10 didn't have his priorities straight. I won't deny when I originally wanted to come back to the X-Men, I was more focused on running away. I was behaving recklessly as a result, and eventually it got so bad that the rest of the X-Men called me on it. Embarrassing. Storm ended up challenging me for leadership, and she kicked my butt too, unsurprisingly. I might be a great tactician and a master of trigonometry, but you know, these laser eyes that are really portals to another dimension filled with limitless energy, apparently, have nothing on what my teammate Aurora is capable of. And so I was unable to leave and forced to return to my family, with a lot of my fellow mutants judging me for trying to shirk my responsibilities to my wife and child. Number 9, blasted Wolverine because he dropped a truth bomb. Some might see it that way anyways. I, however, feel like Logan was being very insensitive and disrespectful to Emma and I at the time. Wolverine basically saw Emma Frost and I together following one of Jean's many deaths and harshly judged me. What part of the mourning process is this, he asked us. First of all, he barged in on us, then he started accusing me of not mourning properly? Did I overreact by optic blasting him out of a window? Maybe. I don't know why Logan always has to goad me though. Why can't we just have a calm, reasonable discussion about our feelings? It's almost like he wants me to fight him. Number 8, re-establish the X-Force. The X-Force is basically a mutant team for when there are missions that don't really fall on brand for the X-Men. Until we had the Hellions, they were kind of like our mutant Suicide Squad, except mostly made up of heroes instead of villains. But these were heroes who weren't afraid of killing when needed. The heroes who were more edgy than the rest of us. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of the X-Force really, but I can recognize when the team is necessary, and I know when we need to use them and when it's time to bring that kill squad back together. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed with me. Some questioned my motives, while others have been known to judge me for ordering other mutants to kill while keeping my own hands clean of these deeds. Although in my opinion, ordering someone to kill makes me just as responsible, and it still greatly weighs on my own conscience, which I think is what many people forget.
Number 7. Slide. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slide, aka Jalome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of the slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf, arf," it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Coming in number 5, we have typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, signage is super lame. Well, typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4, the Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
And coming in number 3, we have Spidercide, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spidercide was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history. So any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spidercide is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2, Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank, a massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Almost let a little girl die in surgery. In Amazing Spider-Man number 700, Doc Ock switches minds with Spider-Man. Sort of. Doc Ock, now in Spider-Man's body, is exposed to all of Peter's memories and experiences, and it definitely has an effect. He decides to become a superhero, calling himself the Superior Spider-Man. However, in the first issue of Superior Spider-Man, it's revealed that a portion of Peter is still residing inside of the body, and it has some control over Doc Ock's actions. So later in Superior Spider-Man number 8, the Superior Spidey finds a device that he can use to get rid of the last bits of Peter Parker that remain in his brain. However, in order to gain access to this device, he first has to perform surgery on a little girl. So this leads to a scene where Ghost Spider-Man is like in the background, basically trying to prevent Doc Ock from doing the surgery, knowing that Doc is going to finish off Peter Parker after he's successful. However, Peter does eventually relent and Doc succeeds in his surgery, but for a moment there it kind of seemed like Pete was ready to let a little girl die so that he could live. Not exactly Spidey's finest hour.
Number 9. Killed MJ. So Peter's track record when it comes to loved ones isn't as bad as someone like Daredevil, but hey, it isn't great either. In alternate universes especially, Spider-Man has caused a lot of harm to those that he's loved, and I mean a lot. And even in the main continuity, his track record isn't so great. In the Marvel Zombies universe, Spider-Man was transformed into a zombie, and as this happened, felt the uncontrollable urge taking over him. He was like, I'm so hungry, I gotta eat people. He tried to tell his loved ones to get away from him, but it was too late, and he ended up not only killing, but full on eating both Mary Jane and his Aunt May. Of course, can we really blame Peter for this one? Not so much. He was a zombie and he wasn't really in control here. But knowing Peter, you can bet he likely reminisced and blamed himself continuously for this for days on end, even while he was a zombie. Because, you know, Peter just loves to blame himself for everything. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick little reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really helps us out at the channel. And thank you if you've already done it.
Number 8. Allowed a kidnapping. In Amazing Spider-Man number 112, we see Spider-Man really worried about Aunt May. She's gone missing after Gwen Stacy gave her a hard time for meddling in Peter's life too much, and he spent most of the previous issue searching for Aunt May. In this issue, we see Spidey has become so distracted, he doesn't even notice this guy getting kidnapped nearby. What's worse, when Pete does notice this guy, who also notices him, he starts the classic Spidey monologue about how helping this poor slob will take hours. Hours he could spend searching for Aunt May. He actually leaves the guy to get kidnapped, saying, maybe someday I'll have the courage to face myself again. Damn, Pete, you could have easily stopped and saved this guy. If that wasn't bad enough, later on it turns out that Aunt May wasn't even missing, she just had a new job. Way to go, Spidey.
Number 7. Used young mutants as weapons. That's a harsh way of putting it. Professor X did a similar thing with all of us, and I guess a part of me was emulating him in a way. Although at least I didn't use a mutant to train other mutants and tell people it was just a danger room as opposed to a sentient being. But anyways, this became a huge controversy when I suggested that New Mutant Oya do what she felt was right when faced with a hard decision. Poor Oya was only 14 years old, and she already felt terrible about the accidental deaths she'd caused when her powers first manifested. So the wording I used there was poor in terms of providing guidance. I truly believed we were almost out of time and Oya was our only hope, despite Wolverine's pleas that he could still make it in time. As a result, Oya killed members of the Hellfire Club and everyone labeled me as someone who molded our young recruits into ruthless killers and dangerous weapons. Number 6. Exploited X-23. When we originally took Laura Kinney in, I wanted to utilize her, but Wolverine disagreed with me. We needed to get the X-Force back together. I needed that team. I went to Wolverine and explained why, and he was all for it. Although he did mention the fact that I was keeping it from Emma, which, yes, I'm not proud of. We needed to come up with a roster as the team had disbanded. I suggested X-23. Laura Kinney had been trained as a killer and she was highly skilled. She was perfect. But Wolverine felt differently, that she didn't have the life experience to make that choice if offered. I probably should have talked to Wolverine earlier about it, but I'd already offered Laura the spot and she'd accepted. I wanted to utilize her, but Wolverine saw it as me using her. Number 5. Cheated on Jean Grey. So originally I was personally all about Jean Grey. She was perfect for me, I thought, but I don't know. Even I have come to see that Emma, might actually be a better fit for me in the long run. Still, with that being said, it was pretty terrible how that whole thing started. Emma and I were having a psychic affair behind Jean's back. What's worse, I also may have had Emma dress up and emulate Jean within our minds. I mean, she was more the one who offered that, but still, she even changed her hair color. Yeah, it was not good. And what's worse, I knew it was wrong and yet I still went along with it. Eventually, Jean found out, telepathically walking in on Emma and I together. Definitely not a moment I'm proud of. Number 4. Almost made the Skrulls extinct. This one made the cut? Really? I feel like I was at least a little justified here, but I guess I could see how this might seem pretty bad, especially as, yes, not all Skrulls are evil. During Secret Invasion, however, I was desperate. I wasn't sure we'd make it, and so I had to take some pretty severe action there. The plan I came up with was to use the Legacy virus as a template to create basically a Skrull version of that virus. A version that targeted and wiped out Skrulls. Now, this worked well, but maybe a little too well, as the Skrull alien race was then kind of at great risk overall because of the virus. Which, yeah, I feel kind of bad about that part. Number 3. Made out on Jean's grave. I mean, this whole storyline was really a strange one. This happened because Jean's psychic ghost told me that it was okay and basically gave Emma and I her blessing after she died. Jean had apparently learned of an alternate future where everything went haywire because I wasn't fit to lead the X-Men and hoped that me finding happiness would be a good way to prevent this from coming about. Emma and I could have been a little more tasteful though, perhaps, when it came to the location in which we chose to express our feelings for one another. In retrospect, Jean's grave was probably not a good place for a makeout session. Number 2. Killed Professor X. Wow, okay. How can you really blame me for this one? I wasn't even myself at the time, must I remind you? So basically what had happened at this point was the Phoenix Force had returned to Earth during Avengers vs. X-Men. It had taken hold of 5 of us after Tony Stark split it up. Divided, the power was manageable to hold on to, but it also made it easier for the Avengers to defeat us. Slowly, those who were part of the Phoenix 5 were defeated and fell away. I was one of the last people to hold onto the power, which meant, yeah, I kind of flew off the handle, and yeah, I kind of stole that last power from Emma Frost. The professor tried to talk me down and I just was not having it, so I took that power and I killed him. But afterward, I felt really bad about the whole thing, and even agreed that I needed to be basically put under arrest for my crimes. I didn't feel good about that one either, although some may have believed that Professor X had it coming. Number 1. Abandon his family. Okay, this is probably in retrospect one of the worst things I've done in the comics. After Jean died, I never thought I'd love again, until I met Madeline Pryor. Maddie was something else, and what's more, she weirdly resembled Jean. Like, we're talking almost identical. For a while, I thought she actually might be the reincarnation of Jean's soul, but then I thought, nah, that's silly. She probably has no relation to Jean whatsoever. We got married, had a son together, everything was going great, then Jean came back from the dead. Or she wasn't really ever dead? Anyways, it's all very confusing. Either way, she was back, that was all that mattered, so I returned to the X-Men, which kinda meant abandoning my wife and son in Alaska. Yeah. Maddie didn't take it too great, especially after she learned she was actually a clone of Jean Grey made by Mr. Sinister for the sole purpose of mating with me. She got pretty evil and ensorcelled my brother to boot, and my leaving was a big motivation for her transformation from innocent bystander to evil sorceress whose powers mirrored and were on a similar scale to Jean's. Number 10. Death of Dee Dee. In the future state glimpse into Gotham City Sirens, we are introduced to a new member of the team in issue number 1 of the next Batman. For those who are unaware, actually, there are a slew of amazing amazing extra stories that come in this comic, and pretty much all of them are good. While I would say that Gotham City Sirens is maybe the weakest of these, it's still a really good story, so that's not even like an insult to it. But there is a very tragic and heart-wrenching moment that might also infuriate you in this story. The newest member of the team is Dee Dee, an AI droid who was made in the future by a very shady businessman. Exposing Dee Dee's creator for his problematic practices could topple the magistrate's reign, so Catwoman and Poison Ivy bring her into the fold and team up with the AI, and they have like an awesome girls' night out, which is the whole plot, but anyways. However, after we get to know and love Dee Dee on this girls' night out, it's revealed that she is not destined to stay with the group, and in the end, she sacrifices herself to help Gotham and her new friends. Hopefully, if we get some future Gotham City Sirens stories, DC can somehow find a way to feature Dee Dee in those stories, like working alongside the team again. Or maybe if we go past this future, they'll be able to bring her back with her memory. Otherwise, I feel like I was duped into loving a neat new character who I'll just never see again. I hate that. I hate when people are like, look at this cool new character, and you're like, oh, is this gonna be oh, no, they're dead. Okay, never mind. Cool. Number 9, Bat Cat reunited? How could this be a worse thing? I know you're thinking. Wouldn't that be good, Amanda? Well, because these two, it seems, were only brought back together to be ripped asunder once more. How tragic. My heart. Catwoman tells a story of Selina trying to pull off a train heist where she is looking to free the magistrate's captured criminals. In issue 1, while she found Automatopoeia, it was revealed that Talia al Ghul, also on the train, found Bruce Wayne. In issue number 2, Bruce manages to see that Selina is on the train via a monitor in security. Not only does he show up to help save the day, but then he and Selina also have a touching reunion. Always hair in my mouth. Honestly, if you're a fan of the Bat-Cat relationship, issue 2 of Catwoman is for you. You need to read it. There are a lot of great moments exploring what Bruce means to Selina. Despite being reunited, ultimately, Batman decides to split from Catwoman, knowing if they stay together, she'll forever be on the run and in danger. Even more so than usual, I guess. Can't you just be on the run together? Why you gotta split up? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, just a reminder, if you are enjoying DC Future State as much as us, or even if you're not enjoying it, give this video a thumbs up. We really love talking about it with you, and yeah, it also lets us know that you like when we talk about events and event adjacent things. Number 8, the question is... I hope you've clicked ahead if you didn't want this revealed, by the way, because I'm about to reveal who the question is. The question is... Deadman? Wait, what? I don't think this is actually the worst of the worst things to happen, but I just felt that it was kind of random. I mean, maybe there were clues and I missed them in Shazam issue 1 to lead me to this revelation. And if you loved this reveal, feel free to let me know in the comments below if you disagree with me, because, hey, I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it, and I would love to hear about why people love it. In Shazam issue number 2, we learn of the question's true identity after it's already been established previously in Shazam that the identity of the question is a complete mystery. Ooh, we don't know who it is, who will it be? Which is usually a good time. I personally think I like when the question is super mysterious and we actually don't know who it is. I don't need a reveal. In fact, I would have even been cool for this to not be revealed in Future State. The true identity of the question could then be kept a mystery and it could unfold in maybe a new question series. I don't know. But hey, that's just me. Number 7, Billy gives up his life. In Shazam issue number 1, we learn of what happened to Shazam following him leaving the Teen Titans. He appears to have somehow gotten out of the Rock of Eternity, but Raven is nowhere to be seen. So, what happened? Well, it turns out Shazam made a deal to get free and act as a hero on Earth, while Billy took his place as guard in the Rock of Eternity, having the spirit that was needed to do so, because it's Billy Batson. What does this mean? Billy basically gave up his whole life to protect the world, acting as a guardian, while Shazam lives on Earth as a hero in this place. Now, I put hero in quotes because, well, Shazam doesn't really end up acting so heroic without Billy there to kind of guide him. But that's a whole other story. I could do a whole separate point on that. Well, it's later revealed Billy doesn't end up stuck there forever. He was still there for who knows how long, and him even agreeing to act as guardian without Shazam, it turns out was an all-around really bad move. Who are better together, they're not so good if you separate them. Yikes.
Number 6, shot in the head. This one came out of nowhere, okay? So what started as a fun training exercise quickly turned into a very bad situation with Nightwing. So Batman issue 55, we see Nightwing and Batman patrolling Gotham City as usual. Nightwing playfully challenges Batman to a contest, spice up the patrol a little bit, keep it fresh. And at first Batman isn't really on board, but eventually he's like, all right, let's do this, young blood. The game is, whoever shoots their grapple first as they're falling loses. So you gotta see who can get closest to the ground. How low can you go, Gotham edition? So they make the dive, and Nightwing technically wins. Because Batman breaks early to attend to the bat symbol. Rules are rules. He still did win. That's a win. But the fun and games end quite early. So at the same time Nightwing and Batman were talking to Jim Gordon, at this point, KG Beast was taking aim at Nightwing's head. And then just like that, the bullet grazes Optic's head. And I don't mean graze like, oh, I think I got shot. I mean graze like it just didn't go through his head. That's the only difference. It got him good. So good that he wasn't the same afterwards. Fun grapple games and then minutes later, serious brain trauma. Sounds like a sidekick classic in the world of the Bat. Number 5, Tim Drake's torture. I'll begin with how I peeled back the layers of the boy's mind. Those are the very scary words of the Joker, and he says it in Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker animated film, created by Tim Gunn and Paul Dini. So we see the Joker and Harley kidnap Robin. Tim Drake was out one night patrolling the streets by himself, just doing what he does best, getting it done. Then, all of a sudden, he has to save a lady from 2 thugs. No problem. That's a cakewalk, or a walk in the park, or a walk in the cake, whatever you like to say. Turns out this was all a setup, and it worked perfectly. The Joker trapped him and then took him to Arkham Asylum, where he used shock therapy and serums, literally anything he could to break him. He tortured him for like 2 weeks straight. That's a long time. I've been working in this closet for 2 weeks. That's a very long time. I have a very good concept of how long time is in this closet. He was brainwashed until he eventually gave up all these secrets about Batman, but it gets even worse. Yeah, that's right. Joker ended up turning him into a mini Joker and gave him the appropriate name of JJ, Joker Jr.
You've lost, Batman.
Number 4, Stephanie Brown's death. So when Tim's father found out about his part-time gig as Robin, he was forced to retire. Meanwhile, Stephanie also broke it off with Tim Drake because she thought that he'd been sneaking around behind her back. She saw him talking to a girl at a locker and she was like, something looks weird here. A little bit of too much hip movements in the conversation. So she needed something else to focus on in her time. So she made a homemade Robin suit and snuck into the Batcave and demanded that Batman would make her the new Robin and train her. I like it. She's committed. Let's do it. So Batman's like, all right. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's party. So cut to several months of training, a new costume upgrade that matched the same design as Tim's costume. She's now rolling with B-Man. And the two worked well together. For a little while, because, that's how these things go. Then she disobeyed orders on a couple of missions and was promptly also fired. No more suit. Get out of here. Beat it. Just like that. This guy's ruthless. Now, this is where things, again, go from bad to worse. So because of this, Stephanie felt like she had to prove herself to Batman. Everybody's got to prove themselves and do crazy shit. So she took one of his plans for the Gotham underworld and tried to step up. This unfortunately led to the events of Batman War Games, where Stephanie was captured by Black Mask, she was tortured, and then sadly she died in a hospital with a regretful and failed Bruce Wayne by her side. Leslie Tompkins sure didn't help either. It was actually revealed that she had withheld a medical treatment that could have saved Stephanie. So in an attempt to make Bruce see the violence that he caused and hang up the mantle, she didn't give it to her. So dark. DC is so dark. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna let her die to teach you a lesson, because you haven't learned any lessons with death. Yeah, because Batman hasn't learned any lessons by people dying, for sure. He needed that lesson. He has no idea what that's like. Number 3, Damian Wayne's death. The 5th Robin in this list of Robins, Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne, he is the son of Batman Natalia al Ghul, which means he's now heir to both Batman, crime-fighting superhero, and also Ra's al Ghul's family, a not crime-fighting team. They're kind of the worst. That's a wild parent-teacher conference to have right there, first of all. So he worked alongside Dick Grayson, who at this point had replaced Batman, and he was perfect, like genetically speaking. His origin was unknown to Batman at this point. He was grown in this artificial womb, made to be a warrior by Talia in the League of Assassins. So he was already a well-established fighter when he was just a preteen. Wild. Talia had him spy on Bruce at first, and she actually left him with Bruce. Like, hey, just trying to throw off his game. Like, hey, here's a kid, good luck. All the while, a cloned and older version of the Boy Wonder was made to cause chaos. Chaos that ended up impaling Damian and killing him instantly. But he put up an unreal fight. Kicking the arrow through his back and then out of his chest, and then calling him a coward. Like, what a way to go out. Number 2, Jason Todd's death. So different than Dick Grayson, Jason Todd did the things the harder way. Like I just mentioned a couple times on this list, he had a pretty rough go, but nothing can be worse than the day of his death in A Death in the Family, written by Jim Starlin back in 1988. So we got to see the death of the second Robin, Jason Todd. So for starters, this was a choice that readers had to make back in the day. Yeah, you could straight up call a number and vote for if you wanted this dude to die. So hats off, you guys did it. Awesome, great work. Do you feel good? You should feel good. So Batman had actually asked Barbara Gordon to come out of retirement to keep an eye on him during a couple of missions. But she saw this side of him, this dark, brutal, angry kid, and she warned Batman, rightfully so. So Jason was tracking this lead to find his real birth mother, who was actually being blackmailed by the Joker this whole time, and of course, to get his sticky hands on Robin. Yeah, the Joker had escaped Arkham Asylum and Batman tracked him to Lebanon, where Jason was as well at the same time during his scavenger hunt for his mother. The Joker got his hands on Jason Todd and beat him to death. It's brutal. And then after the Joker's done, he even calls the site a bit messy. So he leaves Jason to die, and of course he sets off a bomb afterwards, just for good luck. Batman arrives far too late after the bomb had gone off, and he held the Boy Wonder's body in his arms, and it's one of the most iconic things you'll see on the cover of any comic book. So afterwards, he comes back as Red Hood to find that he's been replaced after his death by Tim Drake. Now it makes sense. So Batman considers this one of his greatest failures, not properly training Jason as Robin, and I agree. Number 1, Memory Lane. You know, it's almost just as bad as being beaten to death and then blown up. It's gotta suck when you gotta go back there or just relive it again. Surprise, here's trauma. Remember this? This takes place in Batman and Robin issue 20. Batman and the Red Hood. So at this point, Jason and Batman are on the way to becoming closer again. The relationship is going well. It's on the up and up. So they head to a foreign country to fight crime. Sounds like another day for the duo. Then upon arrival, Jason Todd realizes that this is Ethiopia, the same place Joker dished out that beating I just talked about. Batman wants Jason to dig into his memories and see if anything comes back, anything that may lead to his resurrection, in order for Bruce to do the same for Damian Wayne. That's brutal. Hey, remember any of this? Any tips? Jason, of course, doesn't react too well at all, and then the two end up splitting again, after, of course, a brutal fight.
Number 10, he became the fattest man on Earth. This bizarre storyline is from 1960, and in it, the evil Gorilla Grodd has transferred his consciousness into human form to confront the Flash. He shoots Flash with a radiation gun that causes his body to absorb excess moisture from the air, making Barry swell up like a water balloon to an alarming and uncomfortable looking size. Not only that, Grodd also erases his memories and sells him to a heartless sideshow owner who puts Barry on display and charges people to come and see the fattest man alive. I can only imagine how cringy it would be to try and read this story today and take it seriously. We get to see a deeply depressed Barry, exploited, embarrassed, and dejected, with little kids pointing and laughing at him. Thankfully, he does eventually recover his memory and his figure. Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see more, be sure to take a second and hit that like button. Number 9, his face was disfigured. Not everything on this list is cosmetic, but we'll get into the more emotional suffering later. For now, let's talk about the time Big Sir punched the Flash's lights out. Big Sir is one of the Flash's lesser known villains, but he has some super strength and lands a clean, super powered blow right in Barry's face, and the signature speedster passes out in the bushes at the park. Two kids happen across his body and recoil in horror when they take a peek under his mask. His face is so smashed up it's barely even recognizable. His teeth are chipped, his eyes swollen shut, it's brutal. Seriously hurt, he heads to Gorilla City and gets patched up by his friend Solivar, leader of the super intelligent gorilla race. They heal him up and rebuild his face differently to help keep his identity secret. Luckily, they go with the usual 2 eyes, 1 nose, regular looking face. In the future, advanced surgery helps Flash eventually return to the face that we know and love. Number 8, almost burned to death. In the Flashpoint universe, Barry doesn't have his superpowers, so he works together with Thomas Wayne, that reality's version of Batman, to come up with a scheme to try to get his powers back, so that he can run back in time and fix the timeline. So the plan is simple: recreate the events that originally gave him his powers, by covering himself in chemicals and then getting struck by lightning. Thomas, for good reason, has a lot of concerns, but Barry races ahead with the plan, and it doesn't go well. He is struck by lightning, but instead of receiving powers, he almost roasts to death, getting 3rd-degree burns all over his body. Thomas bandages up what's left of Barry's skin while he screams in agony, and we see Barry lying on a gurney, soaked in blood and covered head to toe in bandages. It is a bit of a gruesome scene and definitely inspires some sympathy for the Flash. Number 7, captured and tortured. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of things got really cranked up. Many heroes were pushed to their limits, and good old Barry is no exception. The Flash gets captured by the Anti-Monitor, and then mentally tortured by the evil Psycho Pirate, who has the ability to manipulate emotions. Barry endures this for weeks, with Psycho Pirate forcing him to relive his worst memories and emotions over and over again. We see poor Barry cowering in the dark, terrified for his life, forced to watch as his fellow Justice League member Red Tornado is killed right before his eyes. When he finally breaks free, he's been through so much emotional turmoil, he goes buck wild with rage and beats on Psycho Pirate until he begs for mercy. Definitely a low point for the Flash.
Number 6. Teen Titans Academy. So we've got some good news and we got some bad news here. The Teen Titans come together in this possible future to start their own academy to train young heroes and even recruit some of the other non-Titans DC heroes as faculty. Yay! And guess what? We will actually get to explore this future as a reality in the Teen Titans Academy comic series. Bad news? Oh yeah, the bad news. The Academy gets blown apart and tons of their superhero students and staff die during its destruction. Yikes. That's how we set the scene for Future State Teen Titans issue number 1. One of the bleakest states of all the series to come about so far, in my opinion. One of being the keywords there. Number 5, Jace's missing backstory. This is something that has bothered me less as we've got to know Jace, aka Tim Fox, Luke's brother, aka Batman right now, but I also feel like it would have helped a lot of people get on board with our next Batman earlier on in his series if we had sort of found out more, because Jace is a lesser known character who has a history that in this continuity is almost like unwritten. It's hard for us as readers to connect with who he is as a character. There are little details you can pick up about him as you read, like in Justice League when we learned that he likes to hum his own little soundtrack to himself while fighting, which I loved as a little tidbit, but you really need to dig or just be paying close attention to get those details. After all, that detail didn't even come from his own book, but from a team book that he is featured in, right? I just want to know more about what being Batman means to Jace, why it's important, and I would love some more hints as to how it kind of all came about. But now, the next Batman is done, so I guess hopefully we'll get more of it in another book and we'll get to see more of Jace's Batman, because I did like it. I was just like, give me some reasons that I can, get really connected to the character and love who they are as a person outside of the persona. Number 4, Amanda Waller's plan. This is a big yikes for me, friends. In Future State Suicide Squad, we're introduced to a whole new squad that seems to be impersonating established heroes, or taking on the role of those mantles legitimately, but not necessarily of their own volition. This is simply because they are a part of Amanda Waller's new version of the Suicide Squad, the Justice Squad. Although a lot of them do actually want to redeem themselves and be good people. And then there is one exception, actually, Connor Kent, who seems to be super interested in embodying his role as Waller's Superman. We also find out that the squad are attempting to help Waller in some kind of mysterious mission that she is on. Considering her plan B is to bring back the crime syndicate using the Black Lantern ring, the mission Project Home Base is probably one of the worst ones she has come up with yet, because that's her plan B. To be like, oh, I'll just bring back the crime syndicate and make them do this. Regardless, our heroes, the Justice Squad, have no choice but to follow her lead, die trying or die refusing. Number 3, Wally becomes Famine. If you've been watching our coverage of DC Future State over here, you probably guessed we were going to go to this point. Why is Wally becoming one of the 4 horsemen one of the worst things, you might be wondering? Well, because it's the opposite of what Wally West fans want. People who love Wally West love him because he's just such a good guy. We love Wally for Wally, and the last big events featuring him prominently when he finally did return to us feel like they have been moving him further and further away from the person we all love. Future State was supposed to be a chance to challenge the status quo, and making Wally a villain again, albeit a very remorseful one on the inside from what I've seen, just isn't actually doing that for the character. You're not reinventing him. We've already done that. Personally, I feel like bringing back the whole West family somehow in Future State would be really cool, or just do something completely new with him. Villainous Wally has been done, and a lot of people were not feeling it when it did happen, and so they still aren't. Family Man Wally, that's what I want. Number 2, the timeline. One of the worst things to happen in Future State for most people is this wacky timeline we were thrown into. Nothing is happening in order, and it's kind of hard to tell where in the timeline of Future State you are when you're reading something. I personally find this to be like a kind of fun mystery. I like to piece it together myself, but for many other readers, they find it weird and confusing. And I get that. There is also the problem of the more Future State you read, the more you kind of get the big picture of what's going on in this reality. But if you want to try and understand that without reading everything, good luck to you, because you kind of got to read everything to get the bigger picture. For some, this makes the pseudo event more enjoyable, but for others, not so much. Fortunately, there are some resources out there online if you do need to know the order of everything. But the other worst thing to happen, or not happened really, with Future State is that we likely won't know what's being kept as continuity till after the event is done. That's the tricky part of glimpsing into possible futures. Some of them will also become impossible in our current continuity, depending on which path we go down, which also might muddy up the timeline in the long run. Number 1, Raven is free. If you've been following Future State, especially the Teen Titans stuff, you'll know how awful this is. For some context, we learn in Teen Titans Future State issue 2 that Raven ends up defeating the Four Horsemen, one of the biggest bads of the Future State timeline, it would seem, so far anyways. But we also learn that in order to do so, she had to take those entities within herself, meaning that she is now one of the most evil and dangerous beings on the planet. Fortunately, Shazam had a solution, and he ends up taking her to the Rock of Eternity and plans on basically staying there forever in his Shazam form to guard Raven. But, and yes, there's a big but coming, in issue 2 of Shazam, we discover that Necron managed to devise a plot to basically get Raven freed, which honestly means that one of the worst threats we've seen this whole event is now going to be coming to Earth. So everyone better watch out.